You know, when we hear the title The Great next to a ruler's name, we think of these noble, glorious figures, born for greatness, right? But what if I told you some of the most famous leaders in history were, well, kind of monsters to begin with? That they clawed their way to the top through some seriously dark and brutal stuff? That's exactly what we're digging into today. Two epic stories, paved with blood and betrayal.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does someone capable of just unimaginable cruelty end up celebrated for centuries? We're about to dive into two origin stories that could not be more different, but somehow they both end with that legendary title, The Great. So in one corner, we've got Ashoka, the overlooked son who became an absolute tyrant. And in the other corner, Cyrus, the prophesied king who was literally marked for death as an infant. Two dramatic paths, two brutal beginnings. You can't make this stuff up. All right, let's kick things off with Ashoka. Now, his story isn't some fairy tale about destiny. Nope, this is all about sheer, ruthless ambition. It's a journey from a prince that people hated to a tyrant that people feared. And then something else entirely. I mean, right from the get-go, the deck was stacked against Ashoka. His mom was a commoner, while his half-brother Tsushima was the golden child, the noble one. To make matters worse, his own father apparently found him physically repulsive because of a skin condition. Ouch. But what Ashoka lacked in looks, he totally made up for it with talent and a massive chip on his shoulder. He was a brilliant governor and a natural on the battlefield, and he just kept proving everyone wrong. So picture this. The emperor is on his deathbed, and his ministers, they see their chance. They could not stand the heir, Tsushima, who they thought was just an arrogant jerk. They knew Ashoka was the real deal, so they lied to the dying king. They suggested, hey, why not just let Ashoka fill in for a bit, just temporarily?
The emperor was not having it. He was furious. But then, legend says, Ashoka steps up and makes this incredibly bold proclamation. And get this, the second the words are out of his mouth, his father drops dead. Talk about convenient, right? And just like that, Ashoka is the new emperor.
So, what's his first order of business? Making sure nobody can ever challenge him. When his brother Tsushima finally gets back to the capital, he's tricked into falling into a pit of burning charcoal. A pit of burning charcoal. And Ashoka didn't stop there. He then systematically had all of his other brothers executed. Just wiped them out. And if you thought that was bad, he also built this palace that looked beautiful on the outside, but was hiding a horrifying secret. Inside, it was a custom-built torture chamber they called Ashoka's Hell. The accounts are just chilling. It was a place designed for unimaginable suffering, with one simple rule. If you go in, you are never coming out alive.
This number, 100,000. This is where everything changes. In his relentless quest for glory, Ashoka attacked the kingdom of Kalinga. The battle wasn't a battle, it was a massacre, a complete bloodbath. He won, yeah, but the cost was absolutely staggering. Over 100,000 soldiers from Kalinga were slaughtered.
But then, when Ashoka walked the battlefield, he wasn't filled with pride. He was horrified. The stench of death, the pools of blood, the cries of families searching for their loved ones, it completely broke him. He was finally confronted with the real cost of his ambition, and he had to ask himself this question.
And in that moment, we see one of the most dramatic transformations in all of history. The tyrant was gone. Ashoka the Great emerged. He renounced violence, embraced Buddhism, and spent the rest of his life focused on peace and justice. In fact, his symbol, the Ashoka Chakra, is right at the center of India's flag today, a lasting legacy of peace, born from unimaginable violence.
Okay, so that was Ashoka. Now let's flip the script completely. Our next story of a path to greatness is a whole different ballgame. The tale of Cyrus the Great doesn't start with ambition. It starts with a terrifying prophecy, a dream that foretold he would overthrow his own grandfather.
So, King Astyages was absolutely terrified by these two nightmares he kept having. His advisors told him it was an omen. His daughter's son would one day take his throne and rule all of Asia. So, when his grandson Cyrus was born, the king made a cold, ruthless decision. He ordered his most trusted general, a guy named Harpagus, to kill the baby. But fate, it seems, had other plans. The general, Harpagus, just couldn't bring himself to kill a royal baby, so he passed the grim task off to a shepherd. Here's the crazy part. That very same day, the shepherd's own infant son had been stillborn. So in this single moment of grief and, well, opportunity, he and his wife decided to secretly raise the royal baby as their own, saving Cyrus from certain death.
For 10 years, Cyrus lived as a simple shepherd's boy. But you can't hide that royal blood, can you? One day he's playing a game, and the other kids make him king. When a noble's son refused his orders, Cyrus had him roughed up. Of course, the kid's dad complained to the actual king, Astyages. The king takes one look at this commoner boy acting with such authority and who looks weirdly familiar, and the truth finally comes out.
Now the king was furious with his general Harpagus for the deception, but he played it cool. Oh, so cool. He invited Harpagus to a big feast to celebrate finding his grandson. He even told him, hey, send your own 13-year-old son to the palace early, he can be a companion for Cyrus. But this wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. A truly horrifying one. So at the feast, after Harpagus had finished his main course, the king leans over and asks this chilling question. Then he has a basket brought out. Inside were the head and hands of Harpagus' own son. The king had murdered the boy and served him to his own father. It's one of the most brutal acts of revenge in history. Years later, Cyrus is now a capable leader in Persia, and he needs to unite all the scattered tribes for a rebellion. To win them over, he devises this brilliant two-day demonstration. Day 1, he commands them to clear an entire forest, working them to utter exhaustion. Day 2, he throws them a lavish feast. His message was simple and powerful. You can have a life of hard labor under my grandfather, or you can fight with me for a life of freedom and prosperity. Yeah, they chose freedom. And this was the moment Harpagus had been waiting for. For years, he had nursed his grief and plotted his revenge. He secretly contacted Cyrus, promising that if Cyrus attacked, he would turn the king's own army against him in the heat of battle. And Harpagus made good on his promise. The king's forces defected, he was captured, and Cyrus, the boy marked for death, finally fulfilled the prophecy. So, we've got two legendary rulers, both called the Great, who took wildly different paths to power. One defined by violent ambition, the other by what really seems like fate. The contrast between them is just stark. Ashoka's path was one of active, brutal conquest. He was a man who seized power and then had this radical transformation. You could say his greatness was earned through atonement. Cyrus, on the other hand, was almost like a force of nature. His rise was fueled by his grandfather's tyranny and his own cleverness. His greatness was recognized from the very beginning because he was the just alternative. You know, it really boils down to two different models of leadership. Ashoka's legacy is all about redemption. It tells us that greatness can be found in the capacity for radical change, even after doing the most terrible things. Cyrus's legacy, though, is one of steadfast principle. It suggests greatness as a quality of character, being a beacon of justice in a cruel world. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to think about. What does it truly mean to be great? Is it about a lifetime of consistent virtue, like Cyrus, who founded an empire on fairness? Or is it about the profound capacity for change, like Ashoka, who redeemed unspeakable evil with a lifetime of peace? One achieved greatness by building something new, the other by rebuilding himself. Which path, ultimately, do you think is the greater?